This week on Dad Awesome, I have the privilege of connecting with David Horsager. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here, Jeff.
Well, I've been excited for this for a while now. And, just hearing you speak, your book, The Trust Edge, hearing your speaking on this topic of trust, I've always been like, that's an area as a dad, I want to be intentional with building into my daughters who are trustworthy and who trust me as their dad. So we're going to talk about that topic for sure. But to start with, just help our guests get to know you, help our listeners get to know you a little bit, just talking about your backstory. We'd love to hear about your family and your kids.
I grew up the youngest of 6 kids on a farm in north central Minnesota. Mom and dad, grateful to have both of them. And had a dad that, if I talk about a hero, it's him. He's 90 years old, 91 next month, and he still runs the 1,500-acre farm. So
Wow.
I'm grateful for that. Though you start to see some frailties coming. And then Lisa and I got married a little over 23 years ago, and we have 4 kiddos, and they're from 17 every other year, 17, 15, 13, 11, and what a journey it's been. So I started after being in college. I started at actually in ministry, one of the biggest Christian sports camp, the biggest Christian sports camp of the country. I ended up taking on a portion of year-round leadership, discipleship programming, and that got me speaking a bunch in spite of myself. And I ended up something transpired to where in 1999 we started our own ministry. At the time, really overt Christian ministry that transformed into being my grad work that became all around trust, and that became really where we're reaching the corporate world and everything from New York Yankees to FedEx to corruption issues in Kenya. Work on 6 continents, have coaches all over the world on this trust framework, on the pillars of trust, and basically it's really we're called to really transform cultures and organizations. And it might be trying to triple sales somewhere, it might be changing attrition somewhere, but it's really using this truth around trust that God was talking about way ahead of me, but people didn't realize it until it came out of the secular research. It became real interesting to people because it turns out trust affects everything more than anything, and it matters more than ever. And so that's our journey now since 99. And just to speak to it, before we had kids, we moved back from Arkansas actually in 1999 back here to Minnesota. We lived in 86-year-old Clara Miller's basement in Fridley, Minnesota, black mold on the walls, no bathroom, kitchen, or windows. We didn't know it was illegal to live in a windowless basement. So we lived there 2 years. We'd go up and share her bathroom and her kitchen. And that's how we started this ministry business. And so there's a lot of, being on your knees and a lot of crying out and a lot of all kinds of things that was good for Lisa and I actually probably before we were having kiddos. So
that was the genesis, the sacrifice to make this passion happen.
I can still remember. Yeah, exactly. I can still remember that October after paying our urgent bills, we had $1.40 to our name, 80 cents in one account, 60 cents in the home or business account. I can remember sitting on the curb at a grocery store in Roseville thinking we didn't have money to go in and get food, but provision by provision. So yeah.
Well, and now here we are now in another Trusting God season for the industry you're in, speaking, author. I know you got a new book coming next year, and I'd actually like to talk about that for a second. So if you go a year ago and talk about dad life and pace of life and travel and all around all around the world to today, how has the dad life shifted in a year of change and being grounded?
Well, I'll tell you what, I think the kids would say, I think Lisa would say you're doing a good job. I'm pretty intentional. I mean, there's times and seasons. I mean, frankly, here I am on this today, and I think last night, oh man, I kind of blew it on something. So I don't think it matters if you're there or not so much always, because you got to being present. There's some things I was really intentional about. One, at least, a couple times a year, we would go on a family on something with my kids have been to Africa twice, and every individual kid would fly with me once a year. So it's like, you see how to treat the stewardess or the whoever on the way. And it was kind of like parenting on the fly, literally, because I would, speak maybe 100 times a year, and that's a couple hundred flights. So, I would take those experiences and we'd experience with them and we'd live with them. And just like I had to get in on the tractor and the combine with my dad, they would get on the plane with me, go to work, they'd sit in the front row. So there was some, I think, some really, really cool things about that. If you're intentional, I think I know some people that aren't, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
There's other things I did so I can say plenty of things. I mean, I have challenges like everybody else. I have hopes like everybody else for my kids. I have wishes that I would have done things better and differently. But a couple things that, if they're inspiring at all, like one thing I did when I was traveling a lot is, sometimes things have a season, but like for at least 2 years in a row, when kids were young, I sent every morning, wherever I was in the world, a video home with kind of an encouragement and a verse and a, hey kids, because I wanted to disciple my kids from afar if I'm not there. There's other things to do in person. And we always had, we had Sunday night family meetings and some things, but there were some things, I think you asked me one time before about the, mission statement. We'd come up with this mission statement. We can come back around to that, but basically, so there was things, we were intentional, but we just kind of shifted some intentionality to a couple things I really love. And I'll just keep going. I'm not taking a breath here, am I, Jeff? But one thing that when it, I can remember our kind of D-Day. I came back from Penn State, working with leadership there as the last flight. I was supposed to have flights every week through to June. And it was like, we had the boardroom, we got everybody in and said, we don't know what's going to happen in our industry business. We've been able to keep the staff, which is amazing. Everything, God's been providing, but overnight we changed our boardroom to a 5-camera studio shoot. We have some other things, thankfully, beyond speaking, how we measure trust and consult and do some of those things. But on the kid front, one thing we did pretty much right away that I've been wanting to do is like pouring into them, because our kids had been going to public schools and whatnot. And so here's one thing. One thing we did is when they all came home, which was March 15th or whatever it was.
That's right.
I, every morning, everybody gets up, like, not like they used to have to get up like 6. Our bus comes way early out there, and they had to feed the horses and whatever. So they didn't have to get up as early, but still, basically you were supposed to get up and have food in your lap by 7:30. We have one TV in our house. We watch very little, but every morning at 7:30, I would have, I said 8 out of 10 might be a pastor, might be whoever, and 2 out of 10 is going to be a TED talk. Maybe why are the refugees this? Why are the discussion, right? So all the kids, so still to this morning, I was with them every day, 7:30, we get up together and we watch you put in some good food, and there's quiet times and all these other things you can do, but this is through video, and it actually brings us together toward discussion. And so that was one thing. The other thing, then Lisa started doing Bible project at lunches and during noons, because they're home. But that one thing in the morning was fun for me, because I could kind of direct, when they get in the truck with me, I might have a podcast going. It might be something I've already started. It might be something. This was like this. Here's intent. What do they need? You know what? My girls need to see a woman leader up front, strong. The boys need to see, what about this racial injustice stuff? What can we watch that'll open our eyes around? What's the reality? It was kind of cool. Certainly not perfect, but that was one thing that was, maybe if I did anything good, that was one idea that worked.
Oh, I love it. I mean, the added intentionality, and then causing you to need to curate what's that going to be.
Exactly.
And then, I mean, it's a chunk of time. If you're listening, some of these talks are 15 minutes, some are longer, probably 30, right? How much time about would you spend?
We spend 7:30 to 8:30 because my brother gave my 15-year-old son a job of coding through the summer. So at 8 o'clock, he has to be coding for that company for all morning. So, and sometimes I'll have the kids, and sometimes my wife has an idea or something, or sometimes I would say to the kids, hey, you have an idea? You want to put something? And a lot of times they just like to wanted me to do it. And I will tell you, even in the buy-in process, now it's part of the way it is.
Sure.
But at first, come on, no other kids have to do this, whatever, it's like, I remember thinking, okay, to get by, I got to have the first ones have to be a little more entertaining.
Sure.
Okay. And I did. Oh, what's a funny? And I could say something. I don't want to get people, but like, who's a funny youth pastor? Who's funny youth? Okay. Who's this? Okay. Now we can go toward a little more. And then, there was positive going. And now they've watched some thought provoking, stuff,
That's incredible. I love to pause before we go too deep and actually back up. Let's go back to your dad, because often our dad journey, dad life is influenced by what we experience from our dad. Can you talk just for a little bit about your dad?
I wish I could act more like him.
Mm.
I'm driven. He's driven, but he is so patient. I never remember him getting angry. I never remember, um, it's just amazing. Mom was a little more excitable, but dad, like it just this faithfulness. Cause we could have lost the farm too. And now you got that farm. Like I'm watching him and now it's worth a whole lot, but his steadiness in the midst of real life challenges, um, there's a lot of things to say about him. I talk about him a lot in my talks because of the example he was. I think when I think about, trusted leader in that new book coming out, I think if that was the most trusted leader I know. And I'm grateful for that because, we can learn from people who do things well and we can learn them from people who don't. But because of that, I know plenty of people that carry certain scars that have to work through a whole lot of things. And I had this massive benefit because of him. And so, yeah, there's so much I could say about him,
Well, maybe as a way to pivot into the topic of trust, telling the one story about your dad, and that just resonated, that he is who he is, even when people aren't looking. Can you tell that story about his character?
Yeah. So, I'm 10 or 11 years old. All my older siblings are off the farm. I'm the youngest. None of our hired staff is on the farm. We're out in the middle of nowhere. Our farm is 8 miles from the nearest town. It's up in a quarter-mile driveway. You can't see anybody else. So I remember Dad and I had been out early in the morning. We'd get on the pickup truck, check the crops, check the beans, check the corn. And we came in and Dad dropped me at the house. I went in to help Mom or play or something. And he drove out to the shop, starts working on some tractors and stuff. And what I remember about this is the phone rings, and back then one phone with a cord attached, right?
Yep.
So the phone rang. Mom takes a message. Usually nothing so urgent, so she would just write a note and put it on Dad's lunch spot. On this day, she said, "David, go give this to your dad." So some random time in the morning, I went out in the attached garage, and there's no windows on that back side of the house. The shop is 100 yards back toward the woods. I mean, there's just no way he would think or hear. Lost a lot of his hearing in the Korean War. I mean, there's no way he would think or see, and no one would be watching, of course. But I walk in the attached garage, and it turns out there is one little entry door window on the attached garage. And so I don't know why still, but I stayed inside and I peered through that little window, and no sign. That's 100 yards or more away. But I looked at my dad, and what I didn't tell you to back up is when we were driving around that morning, we were going from field to field and irrigator to irrigator on those dirt roads, and some neighbor who knows who left some junk in the middle of the dirt road. And my dad hates litter. He doesn't say much, but you know what he's thinking when he swerved the pickup truck over in such a way that my door was immediately above that litter. And I opened the door and I reached down and I picked up Playboy magazine. And I knew what my dad already, I knew what he thought about this kind of thing. I didn't have to say anything. I knew he didn't think it was the right way to look at women or treat women, or I knew exactly what he thought instantly. I dropped it before the pickup. He kicked it under the seat, and we had kept driving and kept checking stuff, and it was just there, And so when we went back up to the house, he dropped me off and he kept going. I went out with the note and I watched my dad without him knowing it. I watched him pull himself up from under a tractor he had been working on. I still today, I mean, it's like this moment is like why I stayed inside, why I stayed silent, why all these things. But I watched him pull himself out way out there. I watched him walk around the other side of the blue Chevy pickup truck. I watched him out the door. I watched him reach under the seat. I watched him pick up that Playboy magazine. And I watched him, not thinking anyone's watching, from 100 yards away or more. I watched him take that magazine and keep his arm outstretched and walk 30 paces over to the shop furnace, and I watched him throw it in the fire. And that moment, when I think of maybe that moment gave me the marriage I have today. Maybe that moment kept me pure for marriage. Maybe that moment, I don't know what, but it was like this seeing the character of without it, and not just a glance or anything. Here's what you do. You walk, So there's a lot of people that talked about dad's character and talked about how he was the best person ever to work with. And I watched when mom and dad had their 50th, and hundreds of people came back from nowhere around the world to work for him. But when you actually see those kind of things when no one's looking, I mean, it's more than what people say at a funeral.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a miracle moment because it shined light on what was real and what you knew about him
Yeah.
in a way, though, that was so amplified that it's affected you and it's affecting your 4 kids, and it goes so far beyond a moment. And what I want to pull out here is us as dads, we have miracle moments in front of us that we can choose to walk out in a way that could cascade to our kids and grandkids and great grandkids, or we can make a selfish decision, a short-sighted decision
Yeah.
that we lose trust with those that matter most to us. And I just want you to build out a little further how important trust is for us to build and for us to model for our kids.
Oh, man, this whole trust work, I mean, it's been a journey for me, and it's transformed me, and I have plenty more to do. And I can talk about all the trust stuff. And I say, almost every talk, unless I forget, I know this stuff. I've seen the research. We put out one of the biggest studies out of North America on trust and leadership every year. And yet I don't do any of it perfectly, but I know it's true. So on the real trust work, there's 2 sides, and then I want to back up from there.
Yeah.
On my grad work, trust work, there's 2 sides. The first finding, when no one was really researching this, was this finding about how a lack of trust is the biggest cost that you have.
That's right.
And it's the same with a dad. Okay. But it's a cost. Like a lock business is built on a lack of trust. That's why I put a lock on something. What's the cost? I've got a money cost and I got a time cost. Now I got to open it. In a team, if I don't trust, then they won't share ideas, and creativity goes down and productivity goes down. In marketing, the only way to this is the kind of the new work is I will say, I hope out any ego, but our work on 6 continents and everything we do is trust is the leading indicator. You never have a leadership issue. The only reason I follow a leader is trust. You don't have a sales issue. The only reason I buy is trust. You don't have a marketing issue. The only way to amplify marketing is increase trust in the message. Diversity, even the biggest Harvard study would show diversity pits people against each other. Unless there's trust, you get all these benefits, right? So seeing it as the core issue, that was the first half. The second half was how you build it. This turns out to be this 8-pillar framework, or these 8 pillars of trust. And that's what all the ways we measure trust out of the Institute. That's the way I speak on trust, we consult, everything we solve against is this 8-pillar framework, the 8 pillars of trust. But it's worth saying here too, that where you got this case for trust and this way to build it, God, back up a second. I was talking about trust way before I was, right? So you got prayers were not answered because they didn't trust God. You got Moses doesn't get to go into the promised land because he didn't trust God enough. You got Daniel 6:24. There was no wound found on him because he trusted his God. You got what not to trust. David over and over. I don't trust in chariots. I don't trust in the sword. I'm not trusting this. I'm not trust in the name of the Lord my God. Anyone who trust in him, Romans is at 10:9, will not be put to shame. You got this whole thing about trust that God was talking about. And the overlap really is the Proverbs 12:22, which is the Lord delights in the trustworthy. And that's all this 8 pillars are all biblical truth. People just don't know it in my work. And the other thing about that is that's what we're really going for. It turns out in the business world, trustworthy sounds kind of mamby-pamby soft. But the problem with being trusted, what I do is help companies be the most trusted in their industry, or help leaders gain trust, is the most deceptive person is the one who appears trusted. And you can build those 8 pillars and look trusted for a time.
Yeah.
But isn't actually worthy of it. So to me, if you want to be dad awesome, you got to be trustworthy.
That's right.
Yeah. And that impacts so much. That's when you talk about the trust edge is an advantage of trust.
Yep.
The greatest advantage you can have is trust by being trustworthy.
Yeah. Well, I know I have the 8 pillars in front of me, and likely we're not going to get to all of them now, but you mentioned earlier kind of a family vision. I think about clarity, one of the pillars, and do we know where we're going as a dad, and do we have a clear mission? Can you talk about that one for a little bit?
So, we're actually, funny enough, so we have a vacation this weekend. So I can say ours quickly, and I don't, we're going to make a grittier one again, I'll say. Okay. So, but it's all over. It's love God, love people. Okay. So our mission is love God, love people, love God, love people. But how we do that, it turns out there's some ways we need to be more actionable. So, so I've got a mission. It's a little too long to go into right now. And so on Monday of this week, so we are taking a little trip this week to the Apostle Islands, Thursday to Sunday. Monday, all day, Lisa and I are actually watching a series of videos and going back through our business and family mission statements.
Wow.
And we're actually going to have some of those older kids watch it with us, because there's a part of it where they can come up with their own mission and as the author of this piece tells us, is your kids will either write their own story or they're joining someone else's. And so to think of it, that isn't a selfish thing. It's all got to be all about my story. It's just that you want them to be a part of the right story, right? You want them writing or be joining in at least the right story. So that's the power of that. One little maybe sidetrack to this whole idea is Lisa and I came up with a different idea. I don't know if Vanessa was barely born, but we were out on a date, had a babysitter, and so our oldest is barely born. And you know, you'd hate to be married to a consultant, right? So I just remember this question I had was, well, what's our output? What does an 18-year-old Horsager look like? And you'll resonate with this, but most people are like, what in the world? How romantic on a date? But we talked about this, and thankfully my wife is patient with me. And we came up with 13 Horsager tenets. Cool. And so this is a little different than the mission. For us, it comes under the mission, but we took these 13 tenets, and they're actually in the Trust Edge, and they're imperfect too. So it's time to rewrite stuff. But at the time, we just kind of spit out. This is one thing I think people have a problem with, is they got to be perfect, especially mission. It's my mission for life, or my vision, or you know what? You don't have to be perfect. Yep. Take what's there now. And so we came up with these 13. I think 12 at first, and we added one. But this idea of what do we want them to look like? We want them to be continual learners. We want them to be grateful. We want them to do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. We want them to be generous and live. We want them to learn to live below their means and different things. So we had these 13. What I thought was most interesting about that, and we don't do this every day anymore, but for several years, we had them on the table we eat at every morning for breakfast. And think of those days. I'm flying a lot of days. Yeah. And even so, the days I was there, I would just bring up one, hey, what's a tenet? What's a tenet? Whatever. And by the time they were 2 years old, just on the, third of the days I'm home, or half the days I'm home a year, by saying something about it, they knew every tenet by 2 years old. By 2 years old. And then they start to hold you to it. So I'll give you one quick example. One of our tenets is be generous. After that fairly significant book deal, and we've been kind of, beans and rice for a long time, your kids can even tell, right? And it's not that we did a bunch of things. We want to keep living below our means and that kind of thing, but they could tell. So I said, I was flying more than I was kind of thinking, it'd be good to have a vehicle that we could kind of trust more with Lisa. And now 2 kids or 3 kids, whatever it was then. It would have been 3 by then, or 4, because we had 4 kids, 5 and under at one point. So whatever it was around then. And so I think it's time to get a new vehicle. And that was a Suburban. It was significant, whatever that we had. And I said, and I was thinking about that. And my 5-year-old Vanessa, I'll never forget this. She said, well, I was talking about trading it in or something. And she said, well, shouldn't we give it away? Because someone needs it. And she'd heard somebody at church somewhere. We ended up giving that vehicle to a person in a family. And they kind of she held us to our tenets of be generous, right? Which we wouldn't have done, but we knew who we wanted to be, but we had to be called back,
I love that practical. It's on the table. We're going to pull one up and talk about it. And then just how quickly a rhythm like that. Well, it took the stating them at first, the imperfect list, but you stated them. And then you put it into action as a repetitive, like get it in front of us more often. So that's super practical. When we go even a little more big picture, when you take trust, the theme of trust, and it could be back to one of the pillars, it could go another direction. If you got 2 minutes till the plane lands, you're flying in, the person next to you is a dad, and they're like, hey, unpacked trust and how I can implement some actionable, like dad life things to build trust into my family culture. What would you share to that young dad?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, first of all, you have to see the root, that trust is the root cause of dadhood of leadership and of life. So instead of calling it something else, it's not a communication issue. It's a trust issue. It's not a this issue, it's a trust issue. They have to start to see that that's the core issue. You have to think bigger about trust. We have to help companies see this and leaders see this. And when I explain the 8-pillar framework, you can start to see why it's never a communication or engagement issue or whatever. But that's the first thing I would do really quickly is like, do you see, that's actually a trust issue. And this was an epiphany I had years ago, going to the grad work. The second thing I would say is, even though there's 8 pillars of trust, I would say the king of the pillars is consistency.
Yeah.
Sameness. This is the reason you trust McDonald's, even if you don't like them. I've had the same burger on 6 continents. Pickles off center everywhere I go, right? So, I mean, consistency. By the way, whatever you do consistently, you will be trusted. If you're late all the time, I will trust you to be late. If your reputation is built on one thing, consistency. In a company, your brand is built on one thing, consistency. If you're inconsistent, you don't have a brand. If you're inconsistent, you don't have a reputation. But if you have a reputation for this, for good, for whatever it is, or lateness, either way, it will be based on consistency. So to me, there's enders and repeaters, right? Enders are the goals. Like, hey, let's run the marathon. Hey, let's whatever. I'm much more interested for the dad in the repeaters.
Mm-hmm.
We are what, Aristotle said we are what we repeatedly do.
Yep.
Augmendino said we're a slave to our habits. Building good habits. So as a dad, it's never going to be an easy time. You're going to say, well, I'll do that once I get sleep again. Mm-hmm. I'll do that once I have enough money. I'll do that. I've done this, it's like, I'll exercise later. I'll eat right later. I'll whatever it is later. And that's one thing I would say with those kids. Hey, no, read to them now. No, find a time to pour in scripture now. No time, find a time. So, and no excuse, like for me, when you're flying, okay, then how are you pouring in scripture? Okay, when you're flying, then how are you encouraging them? Then when I get back, I'll have quality time. Well, it turns out quality doesn't happen without quantity. So how are we going to do that even in the midst of things? So,
yeah, that's really helpful. Now, what about the dad who has secrets and they're not trustworthy, but their kids and their wife don't know it. They're hiding secrets, and they're like, man, the whole idea of building trust. Right now, I have some hard work to do. Where would you encourage them to start to not live with that those secrets?
This is a huge step for them to do, and they probably won't do it unless they really are ready for change. Mm-hmm. But healthy guys and healthy leaders seek healthy accountability. You have to have community. And thankfully for me, so I started, it's like 28 years ago now, with this group of 4 guys. And we used to meet every week in college, but it was guys that loved you, had your back, but got in your grill. How are you staying pure in that girlfriend? How are you doing this? How are you doing that? So it's an uncommon thing I've found now for guys to have, but you have to have community where people will be real, will encourage, will walk with, but also will lovingly confront. And you got to be open about it. For that person, I mean, the only other thing I would think of right off is maybe it is just find help. There maybe is the right church, the right counselor, the right somebody. Sadly, you and I both know that some churches have been called to be the answer, but they haven't been it. Sure. But seeking someone out because you need help. And this is one thing I would say from my experience of watching and walking with leaders, you never will overcome that alone. You keep it alone, you keep it quiet, it will poison you. And by the way, it will be found out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm picturing you as a small child looking through that little slot, and that miraculous moment that had such good, but those moments are everywhere that our kids, whatever it's hidden, it's going to be found out and it's going to cause great pain. If it's something we're really keeping hidden, odds are it's going to cause great pain. So I just want to encourage the same thing. I want to give you a moment, David, just last words to these dads, the Dad Awesome community. Any other things you wanted to share with us before we let you go?
Well, I love talking about trust. I love talking about being a dad. I mean, I love being a dad. I ache for my kids. I ache for them to, I think sometimes I could, with some of the big challenges, it's like giving the weight back to God and he not taking the whole weight on, always like being intentional. I think some people just give it all. Like, oh, it don't take care of itself. I have a tendency to take on too much and really, I talk about trust a lot, but really actually trusting God with my kids, letting that go and having it be his burden That's God's burden is that part, my work. So we say sometimes, got this from IGM with working with International Justice Mission way back, is you can't take all the problems of the world on. It's his weight, my work. So what's my work to do today? But let's let him have the weight of that whole tragic issue in Kenya or whatever it is. I can't take all that, and that's the same with my kids. Sometimes I feel like I sometimes take on the weight of, I hope this, you did that, and letting go a little bit more. I certainly could let go more. I'm on the over-intentional side.
Yep.
I would say one other, and that is, people often ask me about rebuilding trust. And, with companies, you got a 15-step process and all that. But whether you're a company or an individual, it comes down to one thing, and it's not the apology. This is really important for people to know. People want to say, I'm sorry. A CEO from the Netherlands came to America. We met. He said, I said to him, what's the first thing you notice in America? Just out of curiosity. He said, you want to know the first thing I noticed, David? I said, yeah. You got a bunch of lying apologizers. They all say they're sorry and they don't mean it. And I don't know who he was around, but obviously they were saying, I'm sorry, I'm late. No, you're not. You're late every time. I'm sorry I didn't get that done. No, you never get that done. So just to note, even with your kids, it doesn't mean you don't need to start with a sincere apology. You need to be the example of apologies without excuses. I am sorry. Not, I'm sorry, but you should have cleaned that up. I'm sorry, but all this. I am sorry. I treated you like, I'm sorry. I was impatient. I'm sorry. I whatever. But know this, the only way you will rebuild trust is to make and keep a new commitment. And, I guess I could leave it at that.
It's really helpful. I am going to link in the show notes your books, your institute, in the podcast. We're cheering you on. You're going to launch a podcast. Is that right?
We need your help.
Look out.
We need your help. Trusted Leader, the Trusted Leader podcast. I think we're hoping to start sometime in October. We're getting geared up. We got some great guests coming on. But,
yes. Well, that's about when this will air. So I'll try to get all the links out. And then of course your new book when it comes out in 2021, Trusted Leader. So we're going to link all that. But would you say just a short prayer for all the dads listening, and specifically these dads who just praying the Holy Spirit would nudge them to actually do the hard work of becoming trustworthy?
Yeah. Yep. It is work, by the way. And we say it on the farm. It is, that pile doesn't shovel itself. That corn doesn't detassel itself. That the hay doesn't bale itself. A lot of people want this idea of quick fix, 21 days, I can change a habit. That's not true. And that's from deceptive data, by the way. It takes work, but it's work that's worth it. So let me pray. Holy God, thank you for this time. And I pray that you'd use even these words to encourage and to spur on and to connect. And I pray that just as much for me as anybody else, Lord, that we as dads would consistently live out our faith, that we consistently draw close to you, that we would be consistent in habits that glorify you, and that are examples to our kids for generations to come. And Lord, for any out there that need help, I pray that you'd help them get help from you, but through people. And I pray for we as dads, I pray for community. Let's not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but spur each other on. I pray for those listening that they would have accountability, that they would have community, that they would have hope, they would have clarity about the next thing, not everything, but the next thing. What's the next thing I should do to move toward being an awesome, godly dad? Amen.
Amen.